And it's the new year, but the same old Chips podcast. Tyler Melito, joined as always by Ryan Amick. Ryan, happy new year, my friend. Hope you had a good Christmas and a good new year with you and your family.
Absolutely. Happy New Year. It is the same Chips podcast, but hopefully with the year going, we can get even better as the years progress. We're the same, but we look to improve each year and year in and year out. So looking forward to 2021, what it has to hold for us, especially because breaking news for us, at least, I just found out that you'll be returning to Syracuse. So we'll be back hopefully in the studio with our regular scheduled shows during the week.
At least after February 8th.
Yes.
Classes start.
We just found out that our classes got moved almost a month. So that will be interesting. At least, hey, by then things should hopefully start to open up. So hopefully the radio station will be open up for us to go there and have our per usual shows. So hopefully 2021 is good in that sense and in terms of the football sense, because we have a great slate of games that we're about to get into.
Yeah, it's a big football weekend just in general. The NFL, they made it through 256 games of the regular season, all 17 weeks, no cancellations. There was a lot of scrambling and postponing and rescheduling at times. And at times, no one thought we'd get to this point. But Ryan, we made it to the end of the regular season. We have 14 playoff teams in all, 7 for each conference, the NFC and the AFC. The Chiefs, the number 1 seed in the entire NFL playoffs. They get the number 1 seed in the AFC. Packers clinching the 1 seed in the NFC. So both of them will have a bye this week. But we got 6 games to preview, 2 on Saturday, 2 on Sunday. And then top it all off, college football championship on Monday. So that's maybe for another episode. But let's get right to it, because we want to try to keep this episode under an hour and a half, because frankly, our episodes get way too long. Neither here nor there. So let's start with Indianapolis Colts versus the AFC East number 2 seed Buffalo Bills. Ryan, I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, so for the Bills, facing the AFC South in years past has not been good for them. You go back to just last year when they faced the Texans in the first round. It was the first game of the playoffs as well. They ended up losing that one in overtime. And of course, that Josh Allen play where he lateraled it in the closing minutes will always be in question for him. And that was part of the reason why they fell short in that one. Then you go back a couple years prior when they finally ended, at the time, the longest playoff drought in the NFL. They were in the first round against the Jaguars, another AFC South opponent, who they ended up losing to. Then you go all the way back to 1999 when they faced the Titans and then the Music City Miracle and all that happened. So they faced the last 3 times they've gone to the playoffs, they've lost to AFC South opponents. Don't see that happening this year for the Bills. This is a completely different Bills team that we've seen before. And it's because at quarterback, they have arguably the best quarterback in franchise history, not named Jim Kelly, in Josh Allen. What he's done for this franchise from last year with that goof play in the playoffs, almost losing it for them in that sense. He's just completely turned his game around. The accuracy, which was his biggest concern when he was drafted in the NFL, he's now towards the top of the leaderboards, a completion percentage. And you look at the year he's had, I mentioned Jim Kelly, the best quarterback in Bills history. Well, Josh Allen broke almost every record Jim Kelly had for a single season. I'm talking completions, yards, touchdowns, all those broken by Josh Allen in the MVP type season he's had, putting up over 4,500 yards and 37 touchdowns on the season. This offense, because of Josh Allen, is one of the most unstoppable offenses in the league. And it's up there with the Chiefs, who a lot of people think this Bills team has a chance to go neck and neck with if they do find themselves in a matchup later off in the playoffs. But first, they got to beat the Colts, and it's no easy ride for sure. I mean, you look at the Colts, they're one of the better defenses in the league. That's a big reason they got into the 7th seed. And they also have a top 10 offense, which is really helped by the emergence of Jonathan Taylor, talking about a rookie running back, arguably the best running back in his draft class, the production he's put on, especially towards the end of the season. He started getting more touches. As a lot of Colts fans were like, why is Jonathan Taylor not getting that many touches? They started feeding him the ball more. He ended up breaking 1,000 yards. Scored more than 10 touchdowns, which only 2 other Colts running backs have done. You probably heard of them, Marshall Faulk, Edwin James. Those are some 2
Hall of Famers
and 2 greats in terms of Colts running backs. Jonathan Taylor, his first year being in the name sense with those 2 as well. Huge for him, and a huge reason why this Colts offense was able to be one of the more productive ones in the AFC. But you just look at this matchup, I think the Bills are in favor of this one because of Josh Allen. And then you look at Phillip Rivers. He's only won 5 playoff games in his entire career. they barely squeaked into the playoffs. They were on the outside looking in week 17 and barely beat the 1-15 Jaguars to get into the playoffs. So for Philip Rivers' sake, it's good that he didn't potentially end his career with a loss to the 1-15 Jaguars. But that doesn't mean that they're going to win this game, which I think the Bills are definitely in favor of. And the biggest thing for the Bills, they don't have Cole Beasley for this one, but they did sign Kenny Stills, so that could end up being supplementing the loss of Cole Beasley. And it doesn't really matter because they still have Stephon Diggs. And Josh Allen to Stephon Diggs has been one of the premier dynamic duos in the league. Look at Stephon Diggs. He leads the NFL in receptions and receiving yards. And you look at some of the duos in this league, Patrick Mahomes, Tyreek Hill, Aaron Rodgers, Davante Adams, Russell Wilson, DK Metcalf. Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs is right up there with some of the great duos in this league. And it's a big reason why I think the Bills should be favored in this one.
Yeah, I agree that the Bills should be favored as well. They're also playing at home. They will have fans. Governor Cuomo saying the Bills can have, I believe it's 6,700 fans, more or less. And although it's only going to be like such a small number, they're going to be loud, proud. You and I was going to Syracuse. We know how passionate Buffalo Bills fans are. And I just can't wait to watch and listen to that atmosphere because this is something that Bills fans have waited for a long time for, an actual chance in the playoffs. I will say, though, the Colts, although they've been, I'd say, rather inconsistent and not have their 11-5 record being maybe not as good as a typical 11-5 record, given some of the matchups they've had and some of the losses they've had, they could beat this team. They have shown of late that they could play well. They seem to be hitting their stride. Jonathan Taylor, like you mentioned, having a monster game in week 17 with 253 rushing yards. They've won 4 out of 5. And I think Philip Rivers, he just got to do enough. He can't overdo it. That has been some of the issue in playoffs in the past where Philip Rivers, he tries to do too much. And because their opponent tries to shut down one specific thing, specifically when he was with the Chargers, his opponents would shut down LaDainian Tomlinson. And Philip Rivers would try to overdo it at times. And that would ultimately shoot them in the foot. If Philip Rivers just does what he needs to do, I think they got a legitimate chance. That being said, the Colts defense is going to have a tough time. Although the Colts defense is, hang on, I have it up in front of me, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8th in the NFL in yards per games allowed on defense. 8th fewest, I should say. Bills are second in the league in most yards per game on offense, just behind the Kansas City Chiefs at 415.8. The Bills are 396.4 yards per game. So this is a high-octane offense. But if they could shut down Stephon Diggs, the Colts can, then they have a chance. They have a legitimate chance because, like you mentioned, no Cole Beasley. John Brown has been not great all year. Sure, they have Kenny Stills, but was he even that good during his time in Houston before coming to Buffalo? If they could slow down Stephon Diggs, the Colts have a legitimate chance. If not, Josh Allen is going to just torch this defense. And that's what's scary about this whole team for the future, especially, that Josh Allen is doing it basically all on his own. Devin Singletary led the team in rushing yards with 687 and 2 touchdowns on 156 carries this year. So he's doing this without a running game. Imagine if they get a competent running back behind him. Oh, buddy, this team could look really scary for the future. But I think I'm going to go with the Bills here. So do you want to give a score prediction or do we just want to give our winners?
Not exactly, but I do want to mention, you did mention how this is definitely going to be a closer game. I agree with you. From what I was saying before, it made it seem like the Bills were going to completely shut them out. But no, this is definitely going to be a close game because it is just a great defense versus an even better offense. So it's going to be interesting to see who wins the matchups there. And right now, the Colts are sitting at almost 7-point underdogs. I think they can easily cover that spread. I think it's going to be a very close game. But as we both think, I think the Bills will come out as winners in this one, as they're hosting their first playoff game in 25 years. They haven't won a playoff game in 26 years. I think they get both of those done this week. Then in the opening game of Wild Card Weekend, look for the Bills to win this one. I don't know exactly a score because nobody knows. You're just kind of throwing numbers out there. I do think it's a close game, and I think that the Bills come out as winners in this one.
Yeah, I think the Bills will win as well. I think it's going to be a 2-score game, maybe 10 to 14 points, but I think it will be competitive for the most things. One other thing to note, the Bills defense, I think a lot of people overrated them entering the year because they looked so good with guys like Tre'Davious White, Shaq Lawson on the pass rush. Forgetting, there's one other guy who I can't remember, but neither here nor there. The Bills defense hasn't been that great this season. They're allowing 23.4 points per game, and they're middle of the road in terms of yards per game allowed, specifically in the passing game. That's where they're allowing a lot of their yards. 232.9 to be exact, out of 352.9, middle of the road there. So if this Colts offense can get into a rhythm, they could really spell some trouble for the Bills. But like you, I am going to go with Buffalo here. I think they are just too good on offense for the Colts to slow them down. But let's move on to the 4 o'clock game on Saturday. That will be the Seattle Seahawks, the number 3 seed in the NFC, taking on the Los Angeles Rams. That game will be obviously played in Seattle at 4:40 on Fox. And I'll just get right to it. I give the Rams 0 to no chance of winning this game. And it's not because I don't like the Rams. I think they've had a very good year, but they are coming in not in full form. Cooper Kupp is coming off the COVID-19 list. Jared Goff, he's still recovering from that broken thumb or surgery that he had on his thumb that he suffered in week 16 against Seattle. And frankly, the Rams, they're not like they lost to the Jets. That's how you know they're on a slow spell. Their final 5 games are 3-2, a 38-28 win over the Cardinals, a 24-3 win over the Patriots. Patriots aren't looking that good. 23-20 loss to the Jets, 20-9 loss to Seattle, 18-7 win in what was a pillow fight against Arizona in week 17. So I don't think it's more so Seattle's going to win this game. It's just that the Rams are going to lose this game, and not by any of their own doing. It's a lot of things out of their control, to be completely frank. But I will say the Rams have had a good year, and I'm surprised that they bounced back.
Yeah, I also think the Seahawks are going to win this one. But I think of all the games on the schedule, this could be one of the games where an upset comes into play. Because a lot of these games, I don't see the lower seed winning these, not to spoil any of my other predictions or anything. But the Rams, this is a divisional game. The Rams did just lose to the Seahawks a couple of weeks ago. That's when Jared Goff had that thumb injury mid-game and ended up losing that. And the Rams beat the Seahawks earlier in the year. So they've split the games in the regular season. They meet each other in the playoffs. And really, the Rams have only a couple things to hang their heads on. That's the coaching of Sean McVay and 2 defensive players, Aaron Donald and Jalen Ramsey, who have anchored this defense into one of the premier defenses in this league. And I think going into this matchup, if you have great coaching and a great defense, that's a huge recipe for success in a playoff matchup. The one big question, obviously, is the quarterback. As Jared Goff has been playing, obviously, all year, he's had a decent year. He's had some issues turning the ball over in some games, and a lot of their losses were because of turnover problems. I mean, you look at that Jets game, they turned the ball over a lot. That was obviously an embarrassing loss to have the Jets' first win against you.
It's an embarrassing win by the Jets.
And they could, the Rams clinched the playoff spot with that one too. So for them to lose that was just, it hurt their resume a lot, and it made them look like almost a joke playoff team. But really, because of what I mentioned with the coaching and with defensively, what they've done all year long, I think they could bring it to the Seahawks and make this a very close game, especially because when you look at the Seahawks offensively, they're kind of limited. As I mentioned, some of the top duos in the league, Russell Wilson, DK Metcalf, that's definitely up there. But DK Metcalf has had by far his 2 worst games of the season against the Rams. Jalen Ramsey has pretty much locked him up in their 2 matchups so far. So if they can limit that duo of Wilson to DK Metcalf, they'll force the Seahawks to run the ball more, which Chris Carson, he's a great back, don't get me wrong. But with that front man by Aaron Donald, that could play into the Rams' favor. So really look for Tyler Lockett to have a big game if the Seahawks are going to win this one. And really, it really comes down to also just who's going to play in this game. As I mentioned, the Rams quarterback is still up for grabs. Jared Goff might just put a cast on and try to play with dislocated thumb on his throwing arm. Or they might have John Walford, the absolute nobody, who did win them a game and secure their playoff berth. He did win them a game, but it was against Cardinals backup quarterbacks. And going against Russell Wilson is obviously a totally different animal. So that quarterback position is going to say a lot as to the success of the Rams. But also, if you look at the Seahawks side, Jamal Adams might not play. He's really been one of the only playmakers. You talk about the Rams, how they really only have Aaron Donald and Jalen Ramsey for the most part. Seahawks have pretty much hung their entire defense on Jamal Adams. So if he's not there to play, no matter who's at quarterback, they still might have some success against one of the worst defenses in the league in Seattle. So I do think the Seahawks are going to win this one just based on the fact that Russell Wilson is better than whoever the Rams end up playing at quarterback. But I think what it comes down to in this one, between 2 division rivals who went 1-1 in the regular season, I think a lot of it comes down to turnovers because some of the games where the Seahawks have struggled the most is when Russell Wilson has had big turnover games. And some of the games where the Rams have struggled the most is when Jared Goff has had big turnover games. So whoever can limit the turnovers in this matchup, I think, is the winner. And ultimately, I think the Seahawks prevail in this one. But it's going to be close. And I wouldn't be surprised if any team is upset wild card weekend, it's the Seahawks.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely possible, but it would take a tall task for the Rams, specifically on the defensive side. They have had the best defense statistically in the NFL the entire season. Fewest yards per game allowed, fewest passing yards per game allowed, third fewest rushing yards per game allowed, and the fewest points per game allowed, albeit by a slim margin at about 18 and a half points per game. But the thing with the Rams is, like we mentioned, it's the injuries. It's just mainly on the offensive side. The defense can do you a lot of things, but it's going to come down to late in the game who has the ball in their hands. And I'd much rather have Russell Wilson and the Seattle offense with the ball in their hands versus the Rams offense with who knows, and whether it be an injured Jared Goff, John Walford, whoever it is. So that would be my ultimate assessment there. But then again, like I mentioned, of all of these games, at least on the NFC side, because I actually think there's an AFC game that is primed for an upset, I think this one could be the upset game. Let's move on to the final game on Saturday. Man, we're having some fun. We're time flying. Tampa Bay Buccaneers versus the NFC East champion, 7-9 Washington football team. First of all, hats off to the Washington football team. With all the distractions coming into the year, with their name change, the lawsuit, ownership being, what's the word? Moronic, for lack of a better term. We'll just say that. You have Alex. Term. Yeah, I figured I'd be nice. Ron Rivera comes down with cancer, kicks its ass. Hats off to him on that. Alex Smith making his first start in 2 years and then playing very well as a starter. Albeit at times it wasn't great, but the fact that he's back after that gruesome leg injury that he had, giving Aaron Donald a piggyback ride in his first game, playing great. Then you had the whole Dwayne Haskins incident. I mean, the Washington football team has had so many distractions, and the fact that they were able to put those all aside, albeit have not a great record in a pillow fight NFC East, they made the playoffs. So you got to give your hats off to them. One was, before we dive into this game quickly, Dwayne Haskins, is he done in the NFL?
He'll definitely get another shot somewhere. I don't think he'll be a starter anytime soon. I think some team will take a flyer on him as their backup quarterback. He needs some time to grow in terms of maturity. He obviously had off-the-field issues, and then when he was on the field, he played like garbage. So obviously, you need your quarterback to play good on the field, but if he has problems off the field to begin with, then he has a lot to work on, which he does. Maybe we won't even see him in the NFL next year, but he has a chance to, at some point, get in the NFL at some point because he was such a high draft pick. He has the physical traits. He had a great college career. So there is some potential with Dwayne Haskins, but it was very smart for Washington to just get rid of him. He was obviously a bust for them. They realized that early on. And really the only quarterback who was able to string together consistent wins for this team was Alex Smith, who I never thought I'd see on the football field again. Kudos to him. You already mentioned him and Ron Rivera deserve this game more than anybody in the NFL, in my opinion. I mean, it's tremendous what they've fought through to come back and bring a literally no-name team to the playoffs and to win the division, even though they're at 7-9. That's just still great on them. And funny also, I'm realizing Ron Rivera, this is the second time he's going to the playoffs with a 7-9 team. As back in 2014, he brought the Panthers to playoffs at 7-9. And the only other team to get to the playoffs with such a record was the Seahawks in 2010. So he's done.
We saw what they did against the Saints. So
and the Panthers won a playoff game too when they were in 7-9. So yep. Without that consideration, I still don't think the Washington football team wins this game, but it's definitely going to be close. I mean, it's hard to look at Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I mean, Tom Brady, what he's done is sensational in his age 43 season, throwing 40 touchdowns, 4,600 yards, having the single greatest quarterback season in Tampa Bay history, his first year at age 43.
That's a low bar, though. That's a low bar.
That is very true, but it's still sensational what he's done with this team. The only thing that concerns me looking at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers is the strength of a opponent that they've beaten and lost to in the regular season, they destroyed every non-playoff team they faced for the most part, which they were supposed to do. But you look at their losses, every loss is to a playoff team. They have the 2 losses to the Saints. The Chiefs, I mean, a lot of people lost to the Chiefs, so don't be too hard on them there. But the Rams and the Bears, too, all their losses were to playoff teams. And the only team in the playoffs they beat were the Packers. So when
And
they
that's a
make,
lot different team from week 6 than they are now on both sides, the Packers
yeah,
and the
like if they
Buccaneers.
meet again, I don't see the Bucks winning that matchup anyways. So when you look at their schedule, they have not really beaten very good teams aside from the Packers. So that's kind of concerning. And they've also struggled against teams with great defenses. You mentioned the Rams, best defense in the league. Chiefs have a good defense. Saints have one of the top 5 defenses in the league. The Bears are still a great defensive team. And they've struggled and lost those games. And you look at the Washington football team, they have one of the better defenses in the league. They're the second best team against the pass. And a lot of that has to do with their outstanding front 7, all made up essentially of first-round picks. And Jonathan Allen, Darren Payne in the middle, and Montez Sweat on the outside, and of course Chase Young, the captain of this team in his rookie year. Despite missing some games early on, he still has taken over this Washington team and has been the clear defensive player of the year defensive rookie of the year in my opinion.
I agree.
And he's coming for Tom Brady. He said that he wants to get Tom Brady, and I mean, be careful what you wish for because he's one of the all-time greats, especially come playoff time. Not many people want to see Tom Brady in the playoffs unless you're the Giants, who could have saw them in the playoffs, so that would have been interesting. But here we are with the Washington football team. Chase Young wants a piece of Tom Brady, and he'll have possibly a hard time doing so because the Bucs have a great offensive line manned by another rookie in Tristan Wirfs, who's emerged as one of the best offensive tackles in his draft class. That matchup between him and Chase Young could be something to look for, especially. And Tampa Bay going against a good defense, a playoff team. On paper, it might sound like trouble, but I think with Tom Brady, his entire career, he's gotten things done in the playoffs. He has some of the best weapons he's ever had in his career. I mean, Mike Evans is questionable for this game as he went down in week 17, but they almost don't lose a step because they have Antonio Brown, who's been on fire the last 3 weeks.
Holy
and that
cow.
Tom Brady to Antonio Brown connection has proven that it can be for real. Of course, Rob Gronkowski to Tom Brady, one of the best duos in league history. They're still there. Chris Godwin's a great slot receiver for them. They have a great backfield as well, but Ronald Jones, one of the top rushers in the league. This Tampa Bay offense just has too much firepower, in my opinion, even against a strong defense like Washington. They are playing in Washington territory, but that doesn't mean much because there won't be fans there. I think Tom Brady beats the Washington football team, wins the matchup with Alex Smith, but kudos for Washington for even getting to this point. And Tampa Bay, this is one step forward to what could be a good playoff run. I mean, they had very high expectations coming into this season. Who knows? I mean, win one game, maybe they face the Packers in the next round and they beat them again like they did in the regular season. So this is just the first game of Tampa Bay that I think they can have a very good playoff run.
Yeah, you touch on a lot there, so I'll try to go through quickly. First, on the Washington side, it came out a little earlier today. Ron Rivera said that they might go with a 2-quarterback approach against Tampa Bay. They might play a little bit of Taylor Heineke and a little bit of Alex Smith, so that'll be interesting to see how that dynamic is. But obviously, it's just, I mean, this Washington team is going to be carried by their defense. Similar to the Colts, if the defense balls out, or it's similar to the Colts and the Rams for that matter, if this defense balls out, they could definitely beat the Buccaneers in what would technically be, although they are the favorite, it would be an upset if Washington beats Tampa Bay, just given the talent of these two teams. Shifting to Tampa Bay, obviously, Tom Brady, like you mentioned, age 43, showing that anything you can do, I can do better, basically, to any quarterback this year aside from Aaron Rodgers. TB12, it started off slow for him, let's be real, but then they've really picked it up late in the year. They've won 4 straight coming out of their bye. I liked it how you mentioned their schedule, though, because of their 5 losses are all to playoff teams in the Saints, Bears, Rams, and Kansas City. But looking at those games a little bit deeper, all right, Kansas City, they are the best team in football, at least record-wise. Tampa Bay only lost to them by 3. So maybe playing them again in Tampa in the Super Bowl, maybe it's a different result. Who knows? Los Angeles, the Rams are a much different team than they are when they were in Week 11 than they are now. Another game that they lost at home by 3 points. The Bears, that was a weird game just in all facets. That was a game where Tom Brady thought it was fourth down when it was really, or third down when it was really fourth down. Yep, exactly. And then the Saints twice. Okay, those are 2 games where the Buccaneers shouldn't have lost both of those games, in my personal opinion. And then finally, Mike Evans. His status is questionable with a knee injury. And if they lose him, that is a major loss. I don't care what you say about the rest of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers' weapons in Chris Godwin, Gronk, Scotty Miller, Antonio Brown, etc. Mike Evans, he is the most underrated wide receiver in all of football, in my opinion. He doesn't get as much credit given the fact that he's been on so many bad teams. But every year he's been in the NFL, over 1,000 yards receiving. That is just good. Not good, great. And if he can continue doing this for a long, long time, who knows? Maybe one day he's got a passing yards record or receiving yards record in his future. I also think that the Buccaneers are going to win this game, not just because of the fact that they're heavy favorites and all that, but they also have the experience. And mainly the experience falls on one guy in Tom Brady. But when you are the GOAT of football, and I'm going to say that with confidence, it helps a lot. This is a very young Washington team. Sure, Ron Rivera's done it before. He's done this a few times as a player and a coach. Alex Smith, a little bit in his career. But it's a young defense, a younger offense. And I think it's going to ultimately boil down to experience. I think Washington could give Tampa Bay some headaches, and maybe for those in Vegas who bet on the Buccaneers, make them sweat a little bit, specifically Montez Sweat. But ultimately, Tampa's got this one, I think, and maybe they win by a few scores. This is another game, though, that will be an upset in terms of seeding, but could be an upset in terms of quality of team.
Yeah, right now the Bucs are laying 8.5 points against Washington. I think Washington could easily cover the spread. I think this is going to be another close game just because of their front seven. I think Tom Brady, for sure, when he's pressured, plays his worst football. When he has a clean pocket, he's basically unstoppable. And despite how great this O-line has been for Tampa Bay, they're going to struggle against this Washington pass rush, and that's going to keep them in the game all the way through. So I think this is definitely be a close game. If you're betting on this game, I would go Washington in terms of the spread, but I think just in terms of who's going to win this game, I think Tom Brady, what he's done his entire career, is to just do it the same this week, and Tampa Bay wins this one.
Yeah, and one other thing quickly before we move on. This is a night game in Washington. It's going to be probably cold. Who knows, maybe Tom Brady, sure, he had all those years in New England, but he played significantly better in domed or warm weather. That's why he kind of went to Tampa. He retired. You go south when you get a little older. So maybe that can have an impact. But moving on to Sunday, because that finishes our Saturday games. First game on Sunday, you have the AFC South champion Tennessee Titans taking on a rematch from a year ago, the Baltimore Ravens, sneaking into the playoffs in week 7, in the final weeks of the season. But let's look at the Ravens schedule. 11-5. They have won 5 straight games. But those games were Dallas, Cleveland, okay, good win, in a Monday night thriller, Jacksonville, New York, Giants, and Cincinnati. So this is a Ravens team who might be hot. They might be on a roll. But looking at their matches a little bit, you got to take it with a little bit of a grain of salt here. Ryan, I'll let you start us off. What is your assessment for this game, which I think might be the best game of the weekend?
Yeah, I'm glad you said it is probably the best game of the weekend, because I definitely agree with that. Week 17, of course, I was rooting for my Giants to win to get a chance to get into the playoffs. But the other team I was rooting for was the Titans to beat the Texans, because I wanted them to win in the division and face the Ravens in the playoffs, because boy, am I so excited for this rematch. Last year, they shocked the world beating the 1-seeded Ravens, and then they play each other in the regular season, go to overtime. Derrick Henry gets the walk-off touchdown. And then there's some bad blood between them, as before there was something before the game where the Titans were disrespecting the Ravens or something. And then at the end of the game, it was, what was that? A bike? I don't remember what it was.
I honestly don't know.
The coaches weren't upset at each other, and then when they went to go shake hands, there was some bad blood, and they didn't shake hands and whatnot. Right. So there's bad blood between these two teams. The Titans have won the previous 2 matchups against the Ravens, but I like the Ravens in this one because, as you mentioned, they've been hot in December, but they have faced some pretty bad defenses. Titans don't have a good defense, so that kind of plays into their favor, especially stopping the run. This game is going to come down to which running team wins it for their team. And these are two of the premier run teams in the league. Because on one hand, you have Derrick Henry, back-to-back rushing champion, the 8th player in NFL history to reach 2,000 yards, still got 17 touchdowns this year on almost 400 touches. Yeah, as I mentioned, he won the game in overtime against the Ravens. He's just been a monster, an MVP candidate for them. And he's proving that he's arguably the best running back in football. And then you look at the Ravens, they have the best running quarterback in football. He reached 1,000 yards in back-to-back seasons, the first time that's ever been done. And you have two guys in the backfield, and J.K. Dobbins, who's a rookie, almost reached 1,000 yards, who really turned up towards the end of the season when he started getting more touches. And Gus Edwards, who is someone, when you give him the ball, he'll give you 5 or 6 yards. I mean, he doesn't waste touches. He's a monster as well. They call him Gus the Bus for a reason. He's a tank, and he's part of that 3 running kind of backfield, if you're including Lamar Jackson in there, where those 3 guys, I mean, they rank in the top 10 in rushing almost every week. The Ravens have multiple top 10 rushers each week because of Lamar Jackson and because of all the backs they have in their backfield, because what they do with read option and just the run game in general. They've been the best running football team for the past 2 years. So I think that plays into the Ravens' favor because they are playing a weaker defense in Tennessee. And the Ravens have the second best defense in the league when you're looking at yards per game or points per game, excuse me. So it'll be hard for them to stop Derrick Henry. Essentially, no one's been able to stop Derrick Henry. So that's the one thing in this game where the Titans could win if Derrick Henry gets 200-plus yards, multiple touchdowns, and just beats the Ravens for the 3rd time in a row. But the Ravens, similar to kind of how Ohio State played Clemson, they remembered that last year in the playoffs, they lost a close one where they were kind of favored to win that one. Remember, Ohio State was undefeated at that point. But they came back this year, played Clemson again, and Justin Fields had one of his best games. I could see Lamar Jackson kind of doing the same for the Ravens in this sense. They lost in their home territory to the Titans last year when they were favored. Now the Titans are hosting them. I think Lamar has a vengeance. He has yet to win a playoff game. I know that eats at him inside because he was an MVP candidate. People were rating him one of the top quarterbacks in the league. The NFL players named him the best player in the league in the NFL top 100. He wants to prove that he still belongs in that top tier echelons. And the one thing that he's struggled with in his career is playoff games. So look for the Ravens. Lamar Jackson have one of his best games of his playoff career for sure. And look for the Ravens to try to stop Derrick Henry because that's really the only chance they have is if they stop Derrick Henry, they have a very good shot to win this game.
Very good shot indeed. I'm mad at you that you mentioned Derrick Henry because in both my fantasy leagues, I took Clyde Edwards-Helaire over Derrick Henry, and it's a knife in my heart. What?
That was your fault.
I know, man. I just thought Derrick Henry.
I mean, I bought into the Edwards-Helaire hype too. I drafted him, but Derrick Henry was gone by then.
I was just worried about Derrick Henry, all the wear and tear, but clearly he proved every one of those people, including myself, in that camp wrong. Like you mentioned, 2,000 yards on the year, 17 touchdowns, just an absolute beast. But like you got to play the odds here. He's got to slow down eventually. So maybe this is the game. The Ravens are one of the best run defenses in the NFL, top 10, only allowing 108.8 rushing yards per game. But this is going to be a ground fest. The Ravens, number 1 in rushing yards total and per game. Same with the Titans. They're number 2. Ravens were the only team to rush over 3,000 yards as a team this year. That's how good they were. The thing with the Titans, 2,690 yards rushing. All of that's Derrick Henry. The Ravens, they at least have a more diversified portfolio. Plus, Mark Ingram, he's missed time with some injury. He's coming back. He played a little bit in week 17, so maybe he could play a little bit of a role. J.K. Dobbins, though, like you mentioned, he's coming on strong. And he really didn't mention the passing game for either of these teams. A.J. Brown, what a year 2 he's had this season. 70 catches, 1,075 yards, 11 touchdowns. Just absolute clutch. Had that amazing catch at the end of week 17 to give the Titans the opportunity to kick a field goal to beat Houston. And then on the other side, you have, first off, before we go to the other side, Corey Davis has had, although streaky year, he's had a solid year at that. Clearly has filled his role nicely as a number 2 wide receiver. Jonnu Smith at tight end, that's a big disappointment, but that's a separate issue. Now switching to the Ravens side, Marquis Brown. Started off slow, but then he had that monster game against Cleveland and has really put up a solid season. 58 catches, 769 yards, 8 TDs. Mark Andrews as well. top 3 tight end, assuming all tight ends are healthy, maybe top 2, depending on the day and depending on the person you want to argue with. I don't think so. I think it's Kelsey, Kittle, Waller, and then Andrews, but there's a debate there to be had. So this could be a pass, like the rushing game will obviously be the headline, but maybe it's whoever throws the ball a little bit better. That is ultimately who will win this one. And I think it can be Baltimore. I think Lamar Jackson, like you said, has that eating him of his 2 playoff losses in his first 2 seasons. The fact that he's made it to the playoffs 3 straight years to start his career is remarkable in itself. And now I think Lamar Jackson's ready to cement his flag into the quarterback hierarchy as one of the top quarterbacks in the NFL. And think about it, if the Ravens win, and then the other 2 AFC games is Steelers, Bills, week number 2 of the NFL postseason, you get Chiefs, Ravens. That's alone is what I would want to see. But it's going to be fun. This is going to be a lot of fun, this game. Like I said, the biggest game of the weekend, probably the best game, at least on paper. I am going to go with Baltimore in this one, and I think it's not even going to be close. I think Baltimore can win by multiple scores. I think they shut down Derrick Henry. I think they come out with a vengeance, and the Titans will not know it hit them.
So the thing there, I think it's going to be close because even if they do shut down Derrick Henry, which is a huge if, because essentially no one's going to stop him. But if they find a way to stop Derrick Henry, their entire offense revolves around him. And what I mean by that is that he helps everybody else on this offense because so much attention is put on Derrick Henry. Obviously, on run plays, he's the main focus there. But on read options, a lot of the time you find Ryan Tannehill busting out big runs like you saw against the Packers, and he scored multiple touchdowns this year wide open because everyone bites on the fake to Derrick Henry because he's so unstoppable, and then Ryan Tannehill has a wide open lane to run it. So that's been huge in terms of the running game when you're not giving Derrick Henry the ball. And then in terms of the passing game, which you mentioned, Tennessee has been one of the better passing teams in the league, despite being also one of the best run teams in the league. And that's because of play action, because a lot of people bite on the Derrick Henry fate, and that gives Ryan Tannehill the time to go to his great receivers and A.J. Brown and Corey Davis, who have had great years for them. So even if Derrick Henry has trouble, they still have the passing game to look to. But if you're looking at the Ravens from last year's playoff game, their defense has gotten even better in the additions of Calais Campbell, Yannick Ngakoue, who I think it's questionable if he's going to play. So if he plays, that's a big help for them. But I just think this Ravens defense is too much. If they end up stopping Derrick Henry, the Titans will still be in the game because of their passing game is still not elite, but very good. But the Ravens, I think, because they have a run game to match the Titans, they have a better defense, and Lamar Jackson's playing with a vengeance. You know that for sure. I think the Ravens get the upset because they're the 5th seed, but really they're favored in this one. So it'll be interesting to see what happens, but I think the Ravens end up winning.
Definitely will be interesting indeed. It sucks that that's actually the early game on Sunday because the last 2 games, specifically the 4:00 game, I think it's going to be a dud. That I'm talking about Chicago Bears at New Orleans Saints. Saints, the 2 seed, another remarkable regular season. But then you got the Bears. So if you were listening to us earlier in the season, the Bears got off to a great start. They were 5-1. They beat Detroit. They beat New York. They beat Atlanta. Detroit, New York, Atlanta. They lose to Indianapolis. They barely beat Tampa Bay. Then they beat Carolina. 5-1 through 6 weeks. Not impressive at all. Let's be real here. Then they go on a bit of a losing streak. They lose to Los Angeles, the Rams. They lose to New Orleans, 26-23 in overtime. They lose to Tennessee, lose to Minnesota. Then they have their bye week. They lose to Green Bay in week 12. They lose to Detroit in week 13. They finished the season winning 3 out of 4, but those were against Houston, Minnesota, Jacksonville, those 3 wins, and that lone loss in their final 4 games against Green Bay in week 17. The Bears should not be in the playoffs. I actually, not even saying this as a Giants fan, I think the Giants are a better team than the Bears in terms of quality, and the Giants aren't in the playoffs. There's so many teams so much better than the Bears. It's just the fact that the Bears had such an easy schedule to start, and Atlanta handing him that one game, blowing in the comeback fashion that Atlanta did so often this season. I have no faith in the Bears. I think New Orleans can blow them out. The only way the Bears have a chance is if Alvin Kamara, Michael Thomas, and Drew Brees all don't play. And for the first 2, Alvin Kamara, his status is up in the air until Saturday at the earliest. Michael Thomas, he's likely to play, but who really knows there? This is a game that New Orleans, I think on their defense alone, could win. the offense is just a cherry on top.
Yeah, I don't think this game's gonna be close either. I mean, look at the Saints and throughout they've had a lot of playoff disappointments. I don't think this is gonna be one of them, even though
This is it. Drew Brees is done.
yeah, because this might be Drew Brees' last ride at a Super Bowl chance. And look, they've had struggles with the Vikings in the past, but the Bears are not the Vikings. I think they'll easily take care of them. They're 10-point underdogs for a reason because they're not going to win this game. It'd take a lot for the Bears to win this one, including Alvin Kamara not playing. If Alvin Kamara plays, you can just send it in. This game's probably not even going to be close because the Bears, as you mentioned, they started off this year hot, playing bad teams. Then they had a very big losing streak. They ended up benching Mitch Trubisky for Nick Foles. They've been switching on and off who's their quarterback all year long. It really doesn't matter because Drew Brees is at the helm for the Saints. It seems like his ribs have gone a little bit healthier. And Saints are, looking on the defensive side, are one of the best defenses in the league, especially at run defense. They're ranked 4th in rush defense and then 5th in pass defense, which is very bad for the Bears because what they have to hang their head on, especially for the offensive explosion in December, is David Montgomery, as he had 3 straight 100-yard games, and that led to their 3 straight wins. So David Montgomery carried the offensive load for the Bears as they struggled most of the year offensively. Most of the past few years, they've had nothing offensively, but David Montgomery has been big for them, 1,000-yard rusher, top 5 rusher in the league. But the Saints are primed to stop him. The Bears offense, and I don't see them scoring more than like 10 points or so. I mean, I think the Saints are easily going to win this one and move on to the next round. One of the best defenses in the league, Hall of Fame quarterback, great running back who set a record a couple weeks ago. Michael Thomas, who last year people were saying was one of the best receivers in the league, having him back healthy is huge for them. I think the Saints are better than the Bears in almost every single part of the game. When you look at the offense, the offensive weapons, the defense, just everything. The Saints are by far the favorites in this one, and I don't see this one being very close at all.
Yeah, it's just not going to be close. It sucks because this is the long game. Is this not the game that's on Nickelodeon? So
yeah, I was so confused when I saw that. I was like,
yeah,
right.
So Nickelodeon's going to get a dud of a game. Honestly, if New Orleans is up big in the third quarter, I wouldn't be surprised if they rest some of their guys for next week. But then again, we're all saying that the Bears have no chance, and that's just prime opportunity for the Bears to be like, yeah, we're going to just blow them out of the water. Saints cannot lose focus. They got to play this team as if they're the Green Bay Packers to Kansas City Chiefs. Insert really good team here. So that's it. Final game of the slate of the weekend. And this game, I think, is getting a little overhyped. I'm talking about the AFC North champion Pittsburgh Steelers and the Cleveland Browns. The Browns making the playoffs for the first time in 2002, in case you haven't heard. Apparently, that's a big deal. Obviously, it is. Congrats to Cleveland fans. Your long reign of suffering in football has ended temporarily. But obviously, the big news of the morning, Kevin Stefanski, the head coach of the Browns, as well as a couple other coaches and players, have tested positive for COVID-19, will not be available for this one. All the more reason why the Steelers are going to crush the Browns in embarrassing fashion. Because here's the thing also, the Browns got in last week after winning against Pittsburgh. Here's the thing, Ben Roethlisberger didn't play. A lot of the main players for the Steelers didn't play much, if at all. So just on that alone, I mean, come on. There is a big issue here. TJ Watt, Ben Roethlisberger, Cam Hayward. Actually, never mind. I'm reading last week's injury report. Yeah, I gave the Browns no chance.
Yeah, they're all going to be able to play this game. That was a big reason why the Browns were even in the playoffs in the first place, because all those guys were sitting and they barely eked out a 2-point victory in the last week to even get into the playoffs. But congrats to the Browns, ended the longest streak in the NFL of not making the playoffs. But you look back, the last 2 times they made the playoffs were 2002 and 1994. Both lost to the Steelers. Sadly, I think this is going to be the 3rd time that they lose to the Steelers in the playoffs in the past, 25 years or so. So, and a lot of that has to do with, of course, Kevin Stefanski contracting COVID this morning. He won't be able to be there. Also, Joe Bitonio, a Pro Bowl guard for them. He's not going to be playing. Olivier Vernon got injured in week 17. He's not going to be there for them. So they're losing a lot of guys. They've had a lot of COVID issues, especially towards December. I mean, there was that one game they lost to the Jets because they essentially had no wide receivers. Lucky for them, they get their receivers back. But unfortunately, they're versus one of the best pass defenses in the league in the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Cleveland Browns completely rebuilt their O-line and did a great job this year. But against the Steelers, they've suffered, and I don't see that being any different in this one. Also, you look at the Steelers side of things. Ben Roethlisberger gets the ball out quicker than anybody in the league. And the Browns essentially have no pass rushers outside of
Myles Garrett.
Myles Garrett. I was going to say Jason Garrett. Myles Garrett.
Wrong guy.
Yeah. He's been on my mind because I'm a Giants fan. But yes, Myles Garrett is essentially the really only playmaker they have. The Browns do defensively. And I don't see this one being very close. I thought it could have been before all this COVID news came out. I thought this honestly could have been an upset of the week type of pick. But the Browns have just gone through so much. Good for them for finally making the playoffs, but it's baby steps. They made the playoffs. I don't see them winning. Look for next year to be a team that can maybe go farther in the playoffs. But at least this year, there were talks of them winning the Super Bowl last year. They didn't even make the playoffs. At least this year, they made the playoffs and ended the drought and proved to be more of a competent franchise, more than they've ever been my entire life as a human watching football. I've never seen the Browns this good. So kudos to them. They got this far. Unfortunately, they faced the Steelers, the winners of the division, one of the best defenses in the league. Quarterback and Ben Roethlisberger, who might be on his last legs, looking to make one final push for Lombardi Trophy. He's not going to let the Browns get in the way. I think the Steelers easily win this one at home and move on to next week to maybe face the Bills if they win, and that could be a very interesting matchup come the divisional round.
Very interesting indeed. I will say, if I'm a Browns fan, I'm excited. Baker Mayfield has looked to be worth the number one pick, maybe not the best quarterback in his class, but he definitely seems to have a bright future ahead of him. Jarvis Landry has been okay as a number two. Really excited to see when OBJ comes back what this offense can do. Obviously, they got the two-headed monster in the backfield with Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. Their offensive line is much, much better. They've been dealing with the injuries as well, so that has hurt them towards the end of the season. Now I think they got to build up the defensive side a little bit. If they can build up that defense, the Browns can be a scary team for the next 5 or so years, assuming everyone's healthy and happy. But yeah, the Steelers, they're just too good. The one thing I want from the Steelers, though, aside from running the football, because they haven't done that in basically all season, they got to get the ball to Chase Claypool more. Lately, it's been a lot of Juju Smith-Schuster and his dancing and Deontay Johnson and his dropping. That's been all the talk with this wide receiver core. Chase Claypool, I think, is the best one of these wide receivers out of the three, and they haven't gotten the ball much in recent weeks. If they can get him going, because he's a big guy, he's built like Calvin Johnson. Obviously, there were the comparisons after his 4-touchdown game. I wouldn't go that far yet because Calvin Johnson is a Hall of Famer, in my opinion. But Chase Claypool could be a big X factor for the Steelers team, not only this week, but in the entirety of the playoffs.
I think Chase Claypool is definitely the best receiver they have, especially going forward. His rookie year, he's proven to be essentially the best receiver in that locker room, and he's just beginning. So I think I definitely agree with you. He's probably their best player. They should look to get him the ball. But even if they don't, they have so many playmakers on this offense. You mentioned the other two receivers they have in Juju and Deontay Johnson. They have 3 receivers who can easily get open. That Ben Roethlisberger gets the ball out in 2 seconds to them and lets them do the work after the catch. James Conner, who's been big for them as of late, because when they went on that 3-game losing streak, he was out and the run game was nothing. That was a huge reason why they couldn't do stuff offensively. Their defense has always been there, even though they've had some injuries like Devin Bush and Bud Dupree, amongst others. So that definitely didn't help. But the run game not existing was a big reason they lost 3 games in a row. They got James Conner back. He's been playing good for them. They have the receivers. They have Eric Ebron, who's been putting up some pretty good numbers this year. This offense is too much for the Browns' depleted defense to handle. Really hurts that they don't have their coach, and Mike Tomlin's a great coach for them. So obviously they win a coaching battle there. It really doesn't favor the Browns much in this game. The Steelers are only 5-point favorites in terms of the spread. I think they'll easily beat that, and they should have kind of a statement win in this game going on to the next round. Be like, we were 11-0 at one point. We had a really bad stretch towards the end of the year, ended up with 4 losses. But they can beat the Browns in wildcard weekend and then go into a possible matchup with the Bills with a lot of momentum.
A rematch with the Bills.
A rematch with the Bills. That was when the Juju Smith-Schuster controversy kind of started because he was dancing on their logo and the Bills ran him out of town in that game. So a rematch there could be very exciting, especially if the Steelers get momentum with a big win over the Browns. And for the third time, the Browns might be getting eliminated by the Steelers. So unfortunately, the pain doesn't stop there. But at least for Browns fans, they even got to this point. So congratulations, Kevin Stefanski. Crazy year, first year. He finally got the Browns over the hump. Fortunately, he can't coach in his first playoff game.
I couldn't agree more there. Steelers win probably pretty handily. But Ryan, we've done it. We've got it under an hour. But before we go quickly,
done.
I have one more question for you. Okay. Who is the lock of the week for you? If you're betting on any of these 12 teams playing, who is the one that you're like lock to win right now? You had to bet all your money on it.
I'd probably say the Saints, because we both kind of hammered home that game's probably not going to be close. And they're in every facet of the game, essentially, they're a better team. And they've proven that they're one of the best teams in the NFC, while the Bears barely squeaked in. And I thought, honestly, the Cardinals should have been in at the 7th seed because they had the same record. But for every reason, they just missed out there. So I think the Saints will have the easiest time moving on to the second round. But also the Bills. I mean, I know the Colts are a very good team, but the Bills are looking like arguably the best team in football. Obviously, I think the Chiefs are the best team. A lot of people do. But the one team that is giving them trouble or could give them trouble is the Bills. I think they have a statement win over the Colts. They're done losing to the AFC South. They have Josh Allen. They're one of the brightest QBs in the NFL, we all knew about his arm talent, how far he could throw the ball. Mirrors that only of Patrick Mahomes, but his accuracy, the difference between last year and this year is insane. Stephon Diggs is a huge help for that. But aside from him, he doesn't have much offensive weapons to throw to. So the fact that he's doing this with really just Stephon Diggs and Cole Beasley, who's played great, but he's going to be out in this game. Josh Allen, I think, is going to put on a show against a great defense and is going to have a statement win going on into next season. Into the next round. So I think the number 2 seeds are going to have very big wins in the Bills and the Saints.
Very interesting indeed. My lock, I'm going to go with the Steelers. I mean, they're just too good compared to the Browns. You could obviously take the low-hanging fruit in New Orleans, but
that's why I kind of added the Bills one.
I know. I appreciate it.
I'm going to go for the Bills one, but yeah, sure. I think the Steelers are also pretty much a lock at this point, given everything that's happened to the Browns today and just recently with COVID.
I couldn't agree more. I think that's a great place to put a pin in it. Ryan, enjoy the games this weekend, all 6 of them in the NFL, and then obviously the one college football game on Monday. We will all see you next week when we preview the divisional round. Hope you all enjoyed as well. Thank you so much for watching. You've been listening to the Chips podcast. And just stay safe. Happy New Year. We'll see you next time.